Back on the NES, there were tons of games. Lots of them were actually pretty good. But that was mainly if we stuck to the first-party titles. Third-party is where it became a wild wasteland of quality. You could have something awesome, or something god-awful. For every Mega Man 2, there'd be a Fester's Quest. But there were some developers that shone above the rest, consistently putting out great games, and one of them was Sunsoft, known for making fantastic games for their era with catchy music to boot, with one of the prime examples being Blaster Master for the NES. This is not the game I'll be talking about today. Unfortunately, Sunsoft, like many game companies back in the day, went out of business. Until they didn't. And many of their IPs were left in a sort of limbo. While some of them may never see the light of day again, Blaster Master was lucky enough to get picked up by Inti Creates, in my opinion, the best indie game developers to ever exist, consistently pushing out games of high quality while carrying on the legacy of classic titles through their spiritual successors. But Blaster Master Zero isn't a spiritual successor, it's just a straight up remake that, while keeping the old 8-bit art style, sort of, it expands on everything so much more. New bosses, new gameplay mechanics, and a much more expanded story outside of an NES excuse plot. But it begins much the same, with the young hero Jason Frednick looking for his pet frog Fred that ran away. And in the process, Jason stumbled upon a mysterious weapon, the tank Sophia III, and that's where our story begins. Our game begins with Jason rocketing off and entering the underground forest, a man-made biome after humanity retreated underground during the last Great Ice Age, which means this game happened so far into the future that an apocalypse has happened and long since ended, which does kind of fit, as Jason admits he's never seen a frog before Fred. Anyways, this level is pretty much a one-to-one recreation of the original Blaster Master's first area, being a large forest zone because green level was just how you started your 8 worlds in your 2D games back in the day. A lot of this game is focused around being a 2D platformer for traversal, though the controls are a little bit slippery as your tank is given momentum, and there is a bit of an adjustment period, though once you get used to it, it's fine. For now, it's just a simple case of heading through the level and exploring, as this game isn't quite linear. But then as we explore, we'll reach a little cave, and welcome to the other major gameplay style of the Blaster Master series, a top-down shooter game. Controls here are very basic. You move with your left analog stick or D-pad, you fire your gun with A, use your sub-weapon with B, yellow is your max HP, and red is your weapon level. However, you'll want to pick up red boxes to actually level up your weapon, allowing you the opportunity to use more powerful options with things like a long-range beam for level 1, a piercing shot for level 2, a shotgun for level 3, and so on. I'll cover the weapons as they become more relevant. Another piece of tech that's worth keeping in mind is that holding down the right bumper will allow Jason to strafe. You wouldn't think this would make much of a difference, but there are points where this will help out a ton. and you want to really explore these mazes thoroughly, as they usually either hold upgrades or a map for us to collect, and I will be collecting every single one of these by the time the game ends, as 100% is required for the true ending. When exploring around, you might see this dude in a wall. We can't harm him yet, but remember, this monster will be back later, but for now, just drop on down. Inside is another simple maze, but as we progress, we'll find ourselves getting ready for our first boss fight. The Drap Trappers are the game's first optional mini-boss, and they're simple, but they accomplish what they need to do as one of the game's potential first bosses. As a modified version of the regular enemies, they move along the arena and lay down mines that you need to be, well, mindful of. Each of them has their own movement pattern, with green moving vertically along the arena, orange moving horizontally, and last but not least, purple taking a route to reach the center of the arena to detonate the mines that are currently left in the arena before going into one of the holes. It's very basic, but it works for what it needs to be as a potential tutorial boss for the player, and the weakness to the level 1 long-range blaster means the player will have some good damage opportunities and a good chance to stun them as well. And for your victory, you get the pretty helpful item in the form of the mines. I don't use them too often, but they're still helpful when they do come up. Now, after you've collected your optional upgrade, it's time to get back to the main path, going through the levels as you see them, and you'll come across things like enemy rushes and enemies like the Thousand Vios. Most side dungeons will end with either a mini-boss or an enemy rush, and this one is pretty easy. A trick I didn't use here is to pull out the level 6 chain lightning gun, as it pretty much will nuke any regular enemy on screen. Alternatively, you can always use the wave blaster as a win. This will reward you with the Thunderbreaker, one of the original game's key power-ups, and a must-have for minesweeping. What we really want to do, however, is go to the underwater area. Now, this may surprise you, but Sophia the Third is a giant metal tank designed for land, so it kinda sucks to go underwater with it, for now. But not to worry, Jason is a more than capable swimmer, so you can just leave your tank behind in order to reach the main dungeon of Area 1. Now, this dungeon isn't really doing anything super different from the others, but it is considerably larger than the other little mini dungeons we've been through so far. So now it's time to stock up on supplies and try to get your blaster to at least level 7, preferably level 8 because Wave Beam is the problem solver in this game, but once you get to the end, well, get ready for the first major boss fight of the game. Welcome to the first required boss of the game, and yeah, we have a fight against Andross before Andross was Andross. Okay, well technically this game came out in 2017, but the NES original came out long before Star Fox did. Now anyways, the Mother Brain has 2 major attacks she can perform, summoning 8 offspring to move around her and travel when she travels, and she can take root in the ground before firing out her young like a machine gun. Does any of this matter? Well, not if you have the level 7 flamethrower. It not only shreds through her health, but it also stuns her in place, and each fire tick will keep stunning her until she enters a recovery state, and then you can stun her again just a few seconds later, and by the time she does recover, it's too little too late, as we'll already be well below half her health, so you simply hit her with a flamethrower twice and you win. For your efforts, you do get an upgrade to your blaster, the Hyper Blaster on your tank, which does more damage and can destroy those wall dudes that block your path. So that is useful. After each major boss is defeated, you get a new traversal upgrade most of the time. And with this, you'll be able to do some cleanup in the area, usually being able to pick up anything that you missed before, and it's pretty good to look around the area and pick up the stuff that you didn't already have. It'll be helpful in the long run, and again, it's required for the game's best ending. With our upgraded tank shot, we can destroy the wall monsters, and while one of them is required to actually progress the game, the other one will let you get your first health upgrade. There's 8 of these in total, and I'll be getting them all, as, again, 100% collection is required for the game's true ending. It's not as intimidating as it may initially sound. Here we enter the residential region of the game, one of the old Earth cities when humanity was forced underground during the Great Ice Age. This is where you'll start seeing a sizable difference between Zero and the original, as we have a much more vibrant color palette in Zero, and there aren't spikes everywhere. Now, this level has 2 major gimmicks. The tank portion's gimmick focuses around following your transceiver, playing Froggy Marco Polo, looking for Fred's signal, and going into dungeons. This also makes the city the most linear level in the game because there's not really a lot of exploring that you do here. And the first area the signal takes us to is a dungeon with a very easy enemy rush, and beating it will reward you with the homing missiles for your troubles. Sadly, still not the signal we need though. And making our way inside the other dungeon, we start seeing the other big gimmick of this level, that being the toxic waste pools, or in other words... Yeah, the problem with an ongoing count is that you have to look back through your old videos when you haven't used it for a while. Yeah, we've got our poison swamp of the game with the dark purple being no-go zone, so hopefully enemies don't drop power-ups in them or you're going to hate your life. The bright pink zones on the other hand recede in and out as time passes, so you'll often need to wait to cut through their locations to progress. Make your way to the end and prepare for a boss fight. Believe it or not, this is one of only 2 required mini-bosses in the game. The Krabby Larva is all about area denial with their 5 poison pools and the poison spit lingering after landing for a little while. Chain lightning is nice to have, but just take your time and you'll be okay. I wish I could say more about this boss fight, but really, that's all you do. They only have that one attack, and they can only stay in the poison pools. So, shoot them till they die, I guess. For your victory, you're going to be rewarded with the piercing laser, an objective upgrade to your default cannon because it still allows you to do the usual 3-round burst, but now it also has an optional charge beam that you can fire that pierces through enemies and armor. This will be kind of useful later on. From here on, there really isn't a lot for me to say about the rest of this area. We've kind of seen its gimmicks, and we haven't reached the point where the story starts to evolve quite yet. We're still kind of just a dude running around with a tank looking for a frog. We do, however, really want to get the energy barrier power up, as this will allow Jason to take a hit and not lose his weapon level. And the barrier regenerates after enough time has passed, so as long as you aren't getting mercilessly comboed, you don't have to reset a run just because you got clipped one time. It's a very helpful power up, and just having a passive defense buff on Jason, that's huge. Maybe a little too powerful, honestly. Well, there is one more gimmick. In the dungeon holding the main boss itself, you'll find yourself having to get a move on as a giant sludge wave starts chasing after you, and touching it, while not instant death, will hit you so many times it may as well be a game over even if you do survive because your levels will not recover. So, get a move on. Say hello to a pretty large step up in challenge. Crabulus has the same area denial plans the Krabby Larva like to use during their fight, but here's where things differ, as this boss has more than just one attack, and while it is weak to piercing shots, it isn't so weak that you can skip the fight entirely. This boss has attacks that can perform with his mouth and his claws, determining which offensive move it goes for depending on your positioning. The fight still isn't that long, however, as even without something overpowered like Wave Beam, which completely skips the boss fight, you can pretty easily cheese the boss out with your shotgun and some bombs if you have those. Overall, it's fine enough as a one-off fight, and it's kind of odd how this boss that's in the closest thing to a poison swamp area we have doesn't really do anything crazy with the poison, outside of just a little bit on the ground you have to watch out for. Now, the Crusher Shot is a nice addition and all, but more importantly, after beating Crabulus, we get to meet the other main character of the game, Eve. She's a friendly face that we'll be able to talk to throughout the trilogy, being a consistent, comforting, and friendly character to interact with. Jason does mention how seeing her causes him to start feeling things that he never felt before, and seeing some interesting things as well. And he's also getting an unusual feeling from his blaster rifle. All I gotta say to that, Jason, is if it lasts more than 4 hours, you should go see a doctor. Either way, this blonde amnesiac is a welcome addition to the team. Now, as much as I'd love to say it's time for some cleanup, we unfortunately can't get the final collectible here without an upgrade from a future area in the game, and the residential zone is therefore the most railroaded level in the game when you go through it the first time. Don't worry though, we will be back, so we'll be getting that upgrade pretty soon. Now we're in the factory zone, and we're going to have check-ins from both Jason and Eve, as well as a new feature we can do with this game. See, if you go into your menu and click on Eve's little icon, you'll get a chance to speak with her, and you get these little interactions and some extra character development that come from these optional cutscenes, including a pretty crucial one in the story that you can miss later on. We'll talk about that when we get to it. This one talks about Jason's fascination with Fred because he believes Fred is a creature that went extinct long ago, and Eve is fascinated by his interest in it, and she decides, yeah, I'll help you find your frog. Sounds cool. Now, Area 3 is a factory, meaning you're going to have a much more mechanical design to everything, and there's a lot more moving parts going on. And I think it actually acts as a pretty good elevation in terms of level design, and this was also one of the 2 levels you could play through in the demo, the other being World 1, so I think it does a good job being a nice escalation over the early game. Now, entering Area 3 as well, there will be a new dungeon theme for the next 4 or so areas of the game. It's okay, honestly I don't really have anything to say about it, it just exists as serviceable enough music. The other thing you'll see is the gimmick for these, oh my god. Anyways, the gimmick for these dungeons are going to be your conveyor belts, and there's not too much for me to say here. However, the tank segments have another gimmick with these switches that you need to lock your tank into a treadmill and start spinning. Green barriers will lock into place when fully brought up or down, and they will stay there for the rest of the game. On the other hand, yellow barriers start moving back immediately after you flip the switch, and they can and will crush you if you're not careful, so don't screw around. You may even notice some barriers with their designated switches on the side of walls, and we can't do a damn thing about those for a very, very long time, so you know what, maybe don't worry about those ones too much. But you know what, enough about all that, we're in the factory zone, and the main area theme is really good. This level actually culminates in a pretty cool part where you're adjusting the barriers while the conveyor belts are pushing you up and around, and you need to be really quick to get everything going. It's cool. I like it a lot. Oh, and the game is nice enough to make up for you being unable to pick up the health upgrade, so they give you this one for free. My only real complaint about the factory area is it's the shortest of the levels by a lot. In fact, we're basically already at the boss fight. Well, this totally doesn't look questionable at all, and hey, we have a new power-up, the Hover Pack. The Central Gear is a boss that's actually new to Blaster Master Zero, or new to this remake. Tank bosses, despite the tank being a key feature of the original NES game, the tank bosses never existed, and you can tell that these fights are new by their much more complex designs and fights. The Central Gear will move along 2 tracks in the arena and will adjust what platforms are tangible and not, and the gear armors the boss so only the eyeball actually takes damage, meaning you have to hit him head on. Or you use a piercing weapon like your piercing charge laser or your missiles to cut through his armor. Overall, I think it's actually a pretty cool fight. It's one of the best bosses in the game in my personal opinion, and it's one of the 2 bosses you could fight in the demo outside of maybe a mini boss or 2. Overall, yeah, I think it does a really good job, and as far as the first new boss of the game, it sets a very high standard. Now, no real surprise, you don't get anything for winning because you already got your upgrade, but the conversation also shows that we've gone as far as we can really go this way, and there's nothing else we can really do here right now. So, we kinda gotta take our hover jets and go back somewhere that we can. But before that, we do actually have some cleanup we can do because the hover jets give us a lot of options. Using the hover jets to fly all the way up to the top in the area before you fought the Central Gear, there's this little place that Jason can crawl under. I don't really think it counts as a dungeon because it's basically nothing, but you go on in, and after a short little room, remember how I said the Central Gear was a new boss in Area 3? Well, guess what? This optional boss fight is actually a cool little Easter egg. As I mentioned, the Central Gear is new to the remake. Meanwhile, the photophage was the original boss for level 3 of the game, back on the NES. With that being said, the fight is extremely easy, as the level 6 electric bullet will one-shot any active blocks in the arena, making it extremely easy to essentially permanently stunlock the boss if you wish, or if you want, the more fun option is to go ahead and dodge the boss until every block has spawned. Then when they go for their one big attack where they are all active, shoot him once with an energy ball and you'd get a one-shot against him. It's simple, but fun for what it is, and a great way to bring back a classic boss fight in my opinion. So, just to spoil things a little bit, our next objective is going to take us all the way back to Area 1 where we started. This is a good time to go and start doing some cleanup and picking up items that you may not have gotten earlier. So I'll talk about the important ones. Most notably is in Area 3, by taking out the obliteration lasers, enemy rush, you get the flash bombs, which will help you out a ton in some future dungeons. This one you can get before getting the hover boost, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to do at times, because if you miss the jump, you basically gotta run an entire loop again, so I honestly recommend just wait till you have the hover. Also, don't forget to pick up the health upgrade back in Area 2 that you couldn't get earlier. This will allow you to boost your max HP up to 11, which is pretty nice. And once we get back to the very first room of the game and head to the left, we see a giant tube that we can now scale with our handy dandy hover jets, and this will allow us to reach the next area and the many areas after that. Welcome one and all to the worst level of the game. Yeah, I'm not gonna keep anyone in suspense here. I hate this fucking level. Worst part of the game by far. It's a sewer level, and sewer levels are so bad that a certain YouTuber has a sewer count that inspired me to make the poison swap counter. This level is just 90% padding, and the upgrades here, outside of one, kinda suck. There is something kind of notable about the dungeons, and that's that we come across these mutant soldier enemies, making them our first enemies to seemingly have some level of intelligence. Granted, they can only move in 4 directions, and they get mind broken at the sheer concept of a diagonal angle, so, you know, show them your superiority, and kill them that way. As for the music of this level, well, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really like it. Most of this game's soundtrack is good, but this area's soundtrack's just kind of annoying, and visually the level's just unpleasant to look at, and there's also a lot of mines scattered when you get to the lower levels. It's just not really a fun time, and I don't know, everything about this place just feels yucky. And while this isn't exactly the most plot-heavy game in the series, especially not compared to its 2 sequels, the story here is really just, oh, I guess Fred's not here. Well, let's go on to the next area. Oh, there's a locked door. Okay, I guess we should scour this place to find a key so we can move on. Yeah, this is the most padding area of the game. We also have another big gimmick for this level and its dungeons, and that would be the current. Basically, you need to keep running to high ground while a giant wave will come in periodically to knock you over and into any pits that may be present, forcing you to repeat the segment if you fall into the pits. I don't like this gimmick at all. The poison wave worked fine as an oh shit run moment, but this just has a feeling of stop and wait, and you go from one safe spot to the next in no danger, since Jason doesn't get any mobility upgrades in this game like his tank does, so you just have your basic walking speed, and while you can go a bit further if you can optimize your route, it's not by a ton. Oh, and the special weapon we get for this area is the maximum shot, which you'd think a charged shot that does bonus damage would be awesome, except it sucks. It doesn't pierce through enemies like the laser does. It does basically as much damage as a missile, maybe a little bit more, but you can span the missiles. And it takes away from your tank's energy meter, and any obstacles it hits will instantly stop it in its tracks. In short, don't even bother. Save your charge shot for the piercing laser, and save your energy for the missiles themselves. The game also makes us do something else here, which is we have to do platforming and grab ladders while we're falling. Thankfully, we have water below us to catch our fall. Sure would suck if the game demanded we make a far more precise jump with instant death as the punishment for failure later on in the game. Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted. Oh yeah, this little dungeon area sucks as well. It's where you need to go to get the map, but because there isn't a boss fight here and this is Blaster Master 01, you don't get warped out. Instead you have to walk out back the way you came, and that wouldn't be too bad if it was a regular dungeon, but this is one of those that's filled with those tidal waves constantly, so you're just gonna have to wait even longer, and it just pads the game out. I don't like this place, I'm sorry. Really though, not much else to talk about with this place. This level doesn't have a ton of collectibles, so I guess we'll skip ahead to the mini-boss. Spark Salamander sounds like it'd be a boss in a Mega Man X game, and I have nothing to really say about this fight. Your flamethrower kills it in seconds. At least the tackle is cool, and well, it's the one upgrade you get here other than the health pickup that feels somewhat worthwhile, though admittedly I still only ever use the Spark Tackle in one boss fight, and that's purely for aesthetics, not because I actually need it. And again, I don't really have much to say about the rest of this level either. It's really just a 90-second dash from Spark Salamander to the next boss, and don't worry, we still have more shit to cover. For those that saw my boss ranking of this game, you'd know that River Roll here is my least favorite battle in the game. It kinda sucks. This boss is hyper aggressive, will happily trap you in a corner and hit you infinitely, can spawn in enemies that will kamikaze into River Roll, who will eat them, recovering quite a bit of health, before entering an enraged mode where he will happily combo you to death, and his earthquake attack drops down rocks, and really, maybe it's a me thing, but I cannot figure out where those are gonna fall. It just feels random, and I don't know, man. It's such an odd difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game, to the point that this boss is the reason I'm not playing this game on hard mode, because I cannot beat this boss on that difficulty, outside of one single time. And it's not enjoyable enough for me to try and get good against. I guess Earth-Shattering Tyrant is a pretty cool subtitle for the boss if nothing else, but that's about all I gotta say positive for it. The real kicker is, if you kill him, you're still not completely done with the bullshit, as all you get for winning here is a key. You don't get any upgrades. Now you've gotta go back to that locked door up at the top of the area, so yeah, have fun. After you've killed the boss, get ready to go back the way you came, because you have to climb your ass all the way back up. I mean, it's not that long, but it's just annoying, and all the enemies and mines respawn, so yeah, it's just why. Oh, and make sure you save, because remember that ladder platforming we had to do earlier? Oh, well, it's time to fall to your death a lot. Yes, Jason takes falling damage in this game, and past a certain point, it's instant death. And we have a broken ladder to kind of line us up, but it's weird how the margin for error is so thin, and actually considerably harder than it is in the original NES version of the game. Yes, I'm well aware the Japanese version of the game Metafight had you grab onto a single square of ladder. Thankfully, though, with that, the worst of it is over. So, Area 5 is the water level of the game, and Jason says this is gonna suck when you first get here, but to be honest, this might be my favorite level in the game. It's pretty relaxing to get through. The main boss is really cool, and we get a lot more story stuff happening here. Now, as you can imagine, your tank isn't exactly designed for underwater levels, and really you're gonna be spending most of your time on foot or swimming around up until you beat the main boss. Yep, it's another instance of the main boss taking place fairly early in the level itself. The underwater aesthetic of this place is actually pretty pleasant to look at. The music is nice and the enemies are pretty fairly designed, plus you're able to get the map almost immediately, so it's not actually a pain in the ass to navigate and you don't get turned around and lost. Now, you may think there's not much story going on here because your check-ins with Eve will just kind of be her saying, I guess Fred isn't here, but thankfully it develops beyond that point, and there's a cool visual detail in that the area is going to get darker as you descend into the depths, and the background art shows one of the ancient civilizations. Did we find Atlantis? Probably not, but that would be pretty funny if we did. Either way, a lot of this dungeon is going to require Jason swimming around on his own and being separated from Eve and the tank, so navigate carefully. Thankfully, Jason actually has solid swimming controls, so it isn't frustrating, and you'd be surprised, but his little blaster rifle actually does decent enough damage against the smaller enemies, though it obviously can't hurt the massive enemies. To be perfectly honest, I was actually expecting this water level to be the point where it got really frustrating and I just got fed up with the game, especially after the sewer level, but no, this is just a really relaxing level to navigate, all things considered. Now, as we progress and enter the main dungeon, yes, we're at the main dungeon already, you're going to see something of a shadow flying overhead. Remember that, it'll be important pretty soon. Furthermore, if you head south, you'll see this molten shell of some crab-like creature. This doesn't have any special note or radio call associated with it, but it's neat. This dungeon also has two different exits you can take. The one in the top right of the map is the one that will take us to upgrades, while the one in the top left is required for story progression, so I say you should head to the top right first. Also, you really want to make sure you call Eve, because there's a missable cutscene you get, and it's one of the most important story scenes in the game that takes place here. It's just a standard check-in for Jason, with you saying you should find this data chip soon to allow Sophia to navigate underwater. But afterwards it cuts away to Eve's theme, with her starting to get fed up with her memory loss, only for Eve to access some encrypted data on the Sophia. Not only does it know her name, but it knows her past, and with that, her memory returns. Both the good memories and the bad ones. Now, if you try to call her back, you won't be able to reach Eve at this point, so you're kind of on your own, but taking this side path rewards you with a handy-dandy health boost. So, now let's take the main exit back to the dungeon. Going forward, we see what appears to be a whale swimming around frantically. Huh. I wonder why that is. Ah well. That's a really good way to build up the next boss. Honestly, I think the boss of Area 5 has some of the best build-up of any fight in the series. It's simple, and kept to just this one dungeon, but it's effective at communicating to the player exactly what dangers are out there, and without Eve present, Jason has to handle this one solo. Okay, so technically you leave this dungeon and go to another one, but it's really just an excuse for the level designers to make a big boss arena without worrying about level design overlapping with one another in bad ways. This is the Hard Shell, the boss of Area 5 and one of the game's best fights in my opinion. Unlike the other bosses, he has no true weakness that makes him a joke, but the best option for this fight would be piercing weapons and explosives, as he's armored from the front. Granted, you can still stun him with a flashbang once, but that's literally every boss in the game, so that doesn't really count as a weakness. He has bubbles that can be destroyed for ammo, allowing you to restock your grenades and mines, which is really nice, and I thought that he had this big telegraph with the color of his eyes because he goes from green to blue to yellow, but honestly I don't know what that does other than maybe an aesthetic thing. Those bubbles will create barriers as well, so hopefully you have a piercing weapon or a flamethrower to quickly get rid of them because you need to stay mobile here. Now, technically there is one other weapon that actually does really good damage against this boss, and that's your reflector, but it doesn't stun the boss, so it doesn't count like a regular weakness does, though it is a good way to get some great damage off against him. Now, a lot of this boss will be a matter of listening out for where he's located because he's often off screen, so you'll need to either listen closely or use the Switch's HD Rumble, which I think was a pretty cool feature, especially as it was an early title for the console, so utilize that feature to tell you where the boss was hiding and more likely charging at you from. For your hard-fought victory, you receive an upgrade to the Sophia, allowing you to explore the ocean thoroughly. It's a great reward if I do say so myself, and it's kind of weird that we don't get to use more of it, at least not in this game. Now, with our ability to explore underwater, we can safely travel the entirety of the man-made sea and hunt down the collectibles. Most notably, there's a dark dungeon, meaning you need flashbangs to brighten it up in the first place to see where you're going. Dark levels usually have simple layouts designed for testing if you have the flashbangs in your inventory and not much else, so let's just skip ahead to the boss fight. So there's a reason why I haven't really acknowledged the Wave Blaster for boss fights in this video. It's a little bit fucking broken. But if we don't cheese the boss to high hell, then Gurnahide puts up a decent fight, taking double damage from the piercing bullets, as the boss will be hit twice, but otherwise the boss simply advances in on the player, trying to knock them off of the arena, and taking away their ground, otherwise summoning out bullets to dodge, and at half health, wings emerge, increasing the bullet hell chaos. The fight is simple, but effective, as a good bullet hell fight, and I enjoy it with an optional third phase, where if his wings are destroyed, he makes a mad dash towards the player to push them off the arena, but your bullets can force him back. It's a shame that such a well-designed boss fight gets annihilated by the wave beam in under 10 seconds, because it's pretty cool. The auto turret's also a very handy power-up, not so much for the damage output, but because it's a good way to draw enemies aggro, which will be helpful for some later fights. Now, it's time for some cleanup if you haven't already picked up the items. One of them is the mutant soldier ambush in the creatively named ambush room, where beating it gets you the shield mines, which is another power-up that is kind of worthless. I don't think I ever actually use it, and I only ever seen it get used in one segment of the game, and those who play it know exactly which point I'm talking about. It's kind of a shame that once we get the upgrade to our mobility and water, the area is over. There is this little part where you're having to fight the current, which is neat, but for the love of God, remember that the underwater Sophia has a turbo boost, or you'll be here for a very long time. As we're leaving this ocean, I gotta ask, anyone else feel a bit of a chill? First a sewer level, then a water level, now an ice level? What's next, a stealth level? Anyways, I'm going to highly recommend making sure you have flash bombs before going beyond this point. There's a dungeon here that I did do without flash bombs, and it was hell on earth to complete. If you decide to skip this area and come back to it later with the flash bombs, you're going to have an insanely long backtrack to go through, so just be prepared before advancing beyond this point. Either way, the ice level is pretty neat, as you're going to go into mini dungeons to activate control panels to either freeze or thaw areas, allowing you to progress further on in the dungeon. And yes, the gimmick of the on-foot segments is ice physics, but it's not too bad. Plus, Eve mentions that this is where Fred's signal is, meaning we're actually making some progress, which is good. Also, a nice tip for this place is if you have the flamethrower, you can melt the ice and the ice spikes, making it a far more pleasant time to travel through this level. Either way, the ice area is a very big level for us to explore, so it's a good thing that it's backed up by some nice music, and I'm gonna shut up and let you listen for a bit. Then we get to this place, a completely unremarkable dark dungeon for most players, but for me, whoo boy. I remember my first playthrough being determined to run through this place without flash bombs and some health upgrades, so not only did I make it all the way through here stumbling in the dark, but I killed the boss as well, and what boss is that? Well, the Remote Blaster, a gimmick boss against the Boo Beam Trap's weird cousin. He tracks your location and will fire upon that area after a second passes. As Eve tells you, don't stand around and keep moving, preferably have a way to shoot through walls. Now the obvious answer here is a beam that pierces through walls, so Wave Blaster, but I'm not using that because it's overpowered and broken, though I wouldn't blame you for using it here. The problem is, you get to phase 2, he starts freezing the ground, making everything slippery while also firing immediately, meaning you will take damage if you're not moving fast enough, and given how the ice physics works and gives you weird momentum, you probably won't. But for winning, you get the Remote Blast, a power I will be abusing later on in this area and in this game. You'll see just how crazy it is. The Ice Layer is a pretty long level, but I've really explained all there is to really explain here, so I guess I'll just kind of point out the highlights. First off, the place has your receiver begin to flash brighter and brighter as you progress, and there's a good reason for that. After searching for almost 2/3 of the game, we finally find Fred, our main objective for coming down to this underground land at all. We learn he's pretty beat up, but also that Fred has some machine parts on him, suggesting there's more to our froggy friend than meets the eye, but also the receiver is now turned off after finding Fred. Remember this tidbit, it'll come up eventually. Also, pay attention to the walls here, as there's a secret path you can go through. And we also have a weapon known as the Destruction Shot, which is a very powerful weapon, but also deadly to its user. I don't use it too often, but at the very least, unlike the Maximum Shot, I actually do see value in it. And at the bottom of this little secret path, we get a health upgrade, and also the Hazmat art asset from the original Blaster Master opening where Fred mutates into a giant frog monster. Otherwise, the Ice Cavern caps off Area 6 with a large dungeon with ice physics. Who'da thunk? But a flamethrower makes pretty short work of it, and there's not really much for me to say about this place. It's a lot of enemies you've seen before, and these little Beyblade dudes that can only stay on the ice. I'll go a bit more into them in a bit, but I don't know. I like this level, but there's not as much for me to say about it because it's not doing any super crazy gimmicks. Now our next boss fight is kind of interesting. It's another boss that's new to the remake, as the original was just a reskin of Crabulus with a blue color palette. But you go inside and there's nothing here. You're inside the room though, and that's when Eve reveals the boss is the room. No, not the Tommy Wiseau movie. But we do have a fight here on our hands, and it's interesting. You can kill this boss in a single shot with Remote Blast, if you aim it correctly. I chose to refrain from such power, otherwise Ancient Freeze is a giant room of a boss trying to kill you. The blue eyes do laser beams that fire out if they sense you and they go in a straight line. The red eyes shoot bullets out, and then the Beyblades like to let it rip. You can actually tell which of the eyes is which color even when they're closed, as the red eyes have a spiral metal casing while the blue eyes have more simple straightforward casings. It's not a bad fight, but I often just choose to skip it with Remote Blaster. The only other notable thing about the boss is that his health bar is actually located on the top right of the screen, unlike the other bosses in the game that keep theirs in the bottom right, which is really just because of how the screen real estate's being used right now. And for winning, your tank can now cling to walls. This is going to be helpful. Once we get back to our tank, we actually have a sit-down discussion with Eve where she reveals that she and Fred were sent from another planet to blend in naturally with the inhabitants of Earth and search for the whereabouts of mutants that have begun consuming the planet's resources. So, in short, we've got our alien invaders to deal with. I feel I should mention at this point, Eve was not in the original Blaster Master. Not to say she was created for this game, she actually existed in the original series, but wasn't introduced until later games in the series as Jason's wife. And if you think the aliens twist is silly, trust me, this is nothing compared to the PS1 game. Either way, Eve reveals everything to Jason, from her creation to her mission to stop the mutants, and I appreciate that she says she isn't supposed to reveal this information to planet's inhabitants, but also says that the Prime Directive is a crock of shit that no one follows. So, she tries to pull the, I'll handle the mission from here alone, and yeah, she wants Jason to basically just go back and live a peaceful life, but Jason pulls out the oh-so-effective, no way, I'm kicking these guys' asses, because really, he is. And with that, the two of them have determined, okay, we're gonna go in this together, take down the mutants, and now the grand backtrack begins, as our location is all the way back in Area 3, on the opposite end of the map. This is your best chance to pick stuff up, so I'll go into that a little bit. Now, this is going to be your best chance to pick up collectibles you may have missed along the way, as we have to head back through the entire game world so far, and go back to Area 3 where there were barriers we couldn't do anything about originally because the switches were on the sides of walls. If you've been using your map as you go, this should be a pretty quick and easy cleanup, with mostly maybe 1 or 2 items you need to snag. If not, then good freaking luck, you're gonna need it, and get ready for a lot of mini-boss fights. Back in the factory area, if you were paying attention, you probably noticed that there was a triple barrier with a switch on the side of a wall that we couldn't interact with up until now, but now with our ability to cling to walls and ceilings, we can totally make use of it, and we're now able to progress past this point. I feel like if you were playing a randomizer, this would be a really good speedrun bit, but at the same time, if you were playing a randomizer, you'd probably get hard locked by not having a key necessary to get past the basic stuff. Getting inside the mutant base, this area is reported to be heavily fortified and stealth is a must. So yes, we really do have a stealth mission that came after an ice level, that came after a water level, that came after a sewer level. God, wow, that's like 4 terrible mission types in a row. Thankfully, the game outside of the sewer level actually isn't too bad, though I'm still not a big fan of this place. Enemies here have a boatload of health and they can tear you apart quickly, so hiding and avoiding battles is kind of a necessity. The music is frantic, but it's not as good as the song in the original Blaster Master, though to be fair, that song was doubling as a final boss theme, so it kinda had to kick ass. Also, these gorilla robot enemies are especially bulky opponents that will jump around and spam attacks when they see you, so, you know, try to avoid them if you can, and if you can't, then all I can say is Shock Dash and Crusher Blast for best results. Unfortunately, the stealth also continues when we get into the dungeons for the on-foot segments, as there's spotlights overhead as well as mutant soldiers that have spotlights in front of them. Even with the Wave Blaster, they're going to take a ton of hits to bring down, and their AI will make a beeline towards you while firing off weapons, making them just about certain death if you don't get them caught on geometry. So, abuse the level design and their silly AI for the win. So, want to see a cool skip you can do with the remote blaster? Yeah, I'm going to abuse this a bit. Now, given that this game lacks any waterfalls to have a secret behind, I guess we'll have to settle for there being a secret behind a lava fall instead, as we gain access to another dark dungeon. Surprisingly though, this dungeon actually holds a health upgrade instead of any sort of power-up. I guess we really are starting to run out of stuff at the end. This level is thankfully fairly linear, but I wish I could say more positive about it. Unfortunately, anything with these stealth monsters is just unfun to deal with. Otherwise, if you choose to hover above a bunch of spikes, you'll find another secret dungeon that really just exists to give you some power-ups, and also gives you a boss fight. And what a mini-boss that Area 7 is. Let's talk about it. Say hello to the Venom Master. Now this giant is a boss fight. The name doesn't make any sense to me, but the boss is gigantic and has 2 main attacks you'll see, him summoning out some drones and firing plasma balls. Now, thankfully, these drones don't act independently or just spam you, instead they work together to try and coordinate their attacks, making you mind your positioning. And it's not bad, it actually ends up being pretty fun there. He also has his plasma bolts, but the fight really culminates in their ultimate attack, the Acceleration Blast, which does a metric fuck ton of damage if it hits you, probably insta-killing you. But if you destroy his drones while he's charging it up, the blast will be weakened, albeit still extremely powerful, and it ends up scorching the arena permanently. Now, it's a surprisingly involved fight for an optional mini-boss, and the Acceleration Blast you get for victory is a nice addition to the arsenal that will help you out immensely for an upcoming boss fight, and I think it also makes things just more enjoyable in general to explore. Because it kind of just solves the problems of this stealth area, because you can just nuke everything off the map. And yeah, it's awesome. Now, after getting a weapon that fits the stealth as optional for this mission mantra, it's time to continue on through the base. Eventually, you're going to be forced to abandon your tank and go on foot through the remainder of this area. We're given a brief but very dangerous segment with the game where we have a bunch of spotlights and powerful enemies you need to sneak past until you inevitably get caught and everything goes to shit, so you have to make a run for it and hope you don't die in the process. Hey guys, want to see something really stupid? Here we are, the final boss fight of the original Blaster Master. Well, sort of. See, in the original game, you fought a reskin of the World 4 boss here, while the Plutonium Lord was fought as Phase 1 of the World 8 boss fight. Anyways, I talk about this because there's not too terribly much for me to say about this fight in particular. The fight isn't bad, it's a bit unique as you have to platform here, and the giant is going to be firing upon you because your little rinky-dink blaster rifle can't do any damage against him. Maybe someday. I say this because, yeah, there's not really much else to it. Once you call down the tank, you get inside with Eve and you get ready to fight. Though, it's pretty simple. The game wants you to use the Acceleration Blast to win, and that's clearly the intended strategy, as the game has a special cutscene play when you open fire on it. It's not a bad fight, but it's also not anything super interesting, and I think having this big giant monster just be devolved into a basic puzzle boss platforming challenge thing is a little bit disappointing. At the very least, we would eventually go on to get a traditional fight against this monstrosity in a future game. And with that, the final level is accessible, and the final level is the inside of the World 7 boss. Yeah, it's a little interesting. Anyways, get ready for the endgame once you've got everything you think you're gonna need. Entering the 8th area of the game, it's Evil Monster Purple Fleshland. Yeah, that was kind of a trend with third-party NES games now that I think about it, and to some extent shows up from time to time even in modern games like Spectrob's Origins. Well, I say modern games, but that game is like 16 years old now, and I feel really old making that sentence. We're coming up on the more or less point of no return. Granted, there is a save point right before the final boss, so you can always go back and collect things if you need to, but it would be a gigantic pain in the ass as this game lacks any form of fast travel, so I highly recommend picking up everything before coming in here to the final dungeon. Basically every weapon and traversal upgrade, as well as all but one health boosting item, and every single map. There's only 2 things the player needs to collect in this dungeon, and one of them is a mandatory key. We actually do have the water come back for a bit, so I guess the submarine traversal wasn't a complete waste. Still, mostly was though, at least until the sequel. Unfortunately, because there's not a lot to really collect here, there's not a lot for me to talk about, and it's a bit odd to say, but if you've played an NES game, you already know this type of level because you've seen it before, as it's kind of in almost any NES game that was made in this sort of style, so I guess I'll just jump ahead to the more interesting stuff when it does come up. We actually have an optional cutscene between Jason and Eve where they realize that not only is the monster see us as a virus and is trying to expunge us from its body, but also the giant monster we killed at the start of this dungeon, aka the World 7 boss, is starting to regenerate itself. It's another interesting and ominous optional cutscene if I do say so myself. Otherwise though, we really just have to head on down. Now, there's going to be 2 paths when you get to the bottom. The right path leads to the final boss, but you'll be blocked unless you have a key, so we need to head down to the bottom left area and take down one final mini-boss. The antibody cell is a boss that just screams 8-bit era, being a damaging ball that moves around with 8 other damaging balls that surround it. The boss lacks any true weakness, but fire deals lingering damage and electricity can clear out multiple cells at once, making for a very reliable way to rack up crazy damage against the boss. Not much for me to really say about the fight. You've seen one before, you've seen one plenty of times, you know exactly what to do. And with the antibody cell dead, you'll obtain the final key needed to access the lair to the Mutant Lord. Well, not too much left for us to do, but use that key and head off to the end. This seemingly unassuming fleshy cave we can enter is in fact the final dungeon of the game, mentioned by Jason and Eve, where you're going to need to head in and prepare for the fight of your life. Get ready, you've got a tough fight ahead of you. Well, kind of. See, the final dungeon isn't some grand, complex labyrinth, it's instead simply just going to be a pick-a-path with you finding collectibles and fighting different enemies as you go, and it's just here to get you stocked up for the final boss fight. It's fine, it serves its purpose, not too much to it, and it doesn't even have a unique track, so, you know, we're not going to dwell on it too much here. When you reach the end, there's a save point, and this is the absolute point of no return. Going forward, the final boss of the game is going to be fought. If you don't have 100% items, you'll get the normal ending and restart back here. If you have 100% items, you'll be put on the path to the true ending and will be unable to return back to the 8 worlds in the game. When you're ready, step through and prepare for your final battle. The Mutant Lord is a surprisingly simple fight, only walking back and forth while trying to whip you. Granted, this whip goes through any reflective barriers you have, but the fight itself is quite easy for something called the Galaxy Master. But that's kind of the point, as this boss is designed to be an homage to the second phase of the final boss of the original Blaster Master on NES. And this is merely a shell of the Mutant Lord with enough punishment that, yeah, it's not going to be too hard to bring down. The most notable thing is that if you're playing this on the game's hard mode or destroyer mode, it's actually immune to all your weapons, so you have to rely on your sub-weapons to damage the boss, such as your grenades, mines, turrets, and those sorts of things. It's an interesting little twist, I guess, but it doesn't really change the fight that much. And also, your auto turret is your best friend for this fight because it actually aggro grabs the Lord like crazy, and it makes it where he can't hit you with his whip, which otherwise would do a lot of damage. But this is merely a shell of the Mutant Lord, and with enough punishment, the true terror burst forth. The Mutant Lord's true form is being constantly set on fire and phasing between dimensions barely comprehensible. We just see a man perpetually burning. This is also where the game puts its foot down as the only boss on normal difficulty that doesn't just resist Wave Blaster but is outright immune to it. Instead, the boss will change its forms to signify what attacks are being used as well as change its weaknesses of the boss. Hilariously, this includes the level 0 blaster for his green form. And I gotta take a moment to shout out this boss theme in particular. It starts out like your standard menacing final boss theme, but then it starts jamming out a bit and it's really cool. And with enough effort and filling it full of bullets, you'll win the day. Hilariously, while the normal mode of this fight has the element changing gimmick and is outright immune to Wave Blaster, hard mode makes phase 1 immune to all of your weapons, but phase 2 is hilariously, Wave is his primary weakness. So yeah, it's kind of like a cathartic victory lap when you get to this point. But with that, we've won. The day is saved. Now, take time and enjoy the true ending. Jason and Eve are going to take a moment to enjoy the stars together, looking up at the sky, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end as Eve gives the "I must go, my people need me" speech. In the normal ending, she just tells you okay bye and pieces out after giving you Fred, but in the true ending, she knocks Jason unconscious so he doesn't have to go fight this true eldritch horror that the Mutant Lord originated from. Or to compare it to something else, okay, sure, fear and hunger, the Mutant Lord would essentially be the trace of an old god, and the real thing is far more menacing. And the normal ending sends things off on a very ominous note. But I collected everything, so we're in the true ending route, and we have a frog named Fred who wants to help us out, so he guides us to a new hidden machine. Another tank much like Sophia the Third, in this case, Sophia Zero. A far more powerful creation than what existed before. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the true ending. Welcome one and all to the Great Beyond, the true final level of the game, and something of both an ultimate test and a victory lap, as you have a far more powerful tank and full upgrades, but at the same time the game expects you to have this level of power if you wish to win. So, get ready for a somewhat tough fight. With the weird gravity, locations that make no sense spatially, and bizarre warps, this place feels even more alien than the belly of the beast did. And this is supported brilliantly by the bizarre music that feels like you're in a place that, while you may not be completely unwelcome here, you certainly don't belong. Now I'm going to break the immersion a bit and cut ahead and say you really want to head left at the start of this area. This takes you to a little warp maze where you will briefly see the area using the motifs of previous levels and solving some puzzles. Going inside the dungeon here, you already know exactly what kind of area this is going to be, and yes, this is indeed a boss rush. We have to fight through many of the game's bosses in order to find necessary keys in order to reach the last area where Eve resides. Once you take out the Venom Master, you'll get one of the 3 keys needed to reach the end. Now, let's get back to our regularly scheduled adventure. Oh, right. The skeleton boss is back, but it's not as a boss fight, it's just a random dude that you can completely one-shot now. He really is just a mildly inconvenient barrier you have to get through, and you can go through the area and you find some dimension that gets stranger and stranger. It's like you're underwater? Odd. Either way, there are multiple different paths available to take, and you'll probably need to scour through all of them. I first recommend taking the top right path and cutting your way through some of the mini-bosses. And we actually have to fight Ancient Freeze again, so there's that. Remember what I said about the remote blaster being able to absolutely tear through this boss? And that isn't even optimal bullet spread. Anyways, when you beat this boss, this nets us our second key. Our actual path to progression will take us to the bottom right option. And this is where you'll get the scene where Jason says, "Where in the world am I?" So, when you get this scene, that means you're much closer than you think to the final area. But first, well, it's time for another death-defying jump because for some reason they had to bring this back for the final dungeon. It's much easier to do, but like, why, game? Why would you do that? And yes, this is the final set of bosses that has one of the keys you'll need for progression, including Hardshell, who's a lot easier when we have an overpowered weapon and we don't have to worry about not abusing Wave Blaster. I might be a little bit overpowered. Oddly, the final key holder of the game is Spark Salamander of all bosses, because there's a semi-new boss fight in this dungeon that isn't the end boss, but it's also the only true optional battle in the game. Meanwhile, the last key is given to this random, honestly throwaway mini-boss. Now, if you head to the top left in the room where Jason said Eve must be close, you're going to see a faint door outline that's upside down and you can't interact with it. What you need to do is have all 3 keys to go through there, and that's where our final challenge is going to be. But I'm going to go collect the map for shits and giggles. Also, you need to make sure you turn your receiver back on in order for the door to become accessible. I almost forgot to mention that. It might seem a little weird because you probably don't remember turning it off, but it automatically turns off after you find Fred in Area 6. Now, in the giant water room, if we head to the bottom left, we can swim our way down, and there's actually a giant tank door that you can go through, but we don't have Jason to go through it. So instead, what we're going to need to do is just go through it, well, on our own. And that's when you'll see there's one last skeleton boss, and we have no real way to beat this guy. What you need to do is just swim past him, avoid him, and pretend he doesn't exist. And this will take us to the only truly optional boss in this game, the Twin Mother Brains. And what's tougher than one Mother Brain? Well, if you said 2 Mother Brains, you'd be right. But in all seriousness, with there being double the attacks and their drastically increased health from the World 1 boss that you slaughtered with the flamethrower, this fight does feel significantly harder than its original variant, and it's a neat little challenge for players that may want to demolish the first boss with their powered up arsenal. It only exists to get you the map, and this is the only time the map isn't mandatory for anything, so you can completely skip it. In fact, I did on my first playthrough on accident. But honestly, I think I would have preferred if this was required and the Spark Salamander dungeon was either optional or cut entirely. And with that, we need to head up to the upside down door, and with all 3 keys in hand, we can unlock the gate to reach the game's last dungeon, the Ancient Starship. The Ancient Starship is the final dungeon of the game, with a tank segment and an on-foot segment. The tank segment is simply a matter of pushing forwards while a giant death laser similar to an acceleration blast moves forward, wiping out anything that it touches, so play this part carefully. You don't want to eat a giant laser to the face right before the end of it, and have to redo the whole thing. Speaking of the end, once you reach the giant lens, it's time to unleash your weapons and finish this laser off. And surprisingly, we actually have a unique art asset for the entrance to the true final dungeon of the game, which is cool. Now, going inside, the Starship is a very linear level, filled with traps like spike blades and the drap traps, as well as conveyor belts. It's all a bit oddly laid out and lacking any major enemies on the way to the end, almost like something is trying to lure us in here. But, at the very least, we're packing the Wave Blaster, so, I'm sure they're no threat to me whatsoever. Then we have our honest-to-goodness last save point of the game. Get ready for the end, everyone. It's gonna be a tough fight. Entering the final battle, we face off against something much closer to the true power of the mutant, as it's corrupted the entirety of Sophia the Third and is using Eve as a puppet and possibly a hostage, but either way, she's straight up not having a good time right now. And fighting this boss, you see, Sophia isn't realistic for us to beat on foot in battle. Even with our Wave Blaster, she's only taking the slightest of chip damage. So, we really just need her to blow open a door and run away. And once you get to phase 2, the odd layout of the dungeon starts to make sense as you realize it's also part of the boss arena, and now we've got to run for our life because this boss can kill you in merely 2 or 3 hits. So don't look back, don't stop for anything, just run. It's time for the final battle. We get in Sophia Zero, and it's a battle between 2 tanks that would go on to lay the groundwork for the best bosses in the later games in this series. In terms of raw power, you're the clear victor, which is a bit of a twist on the usual rival fight. But Invim isn't worried about things like stamina limits or the safety of the pilot, and instead will spam super moves constantly throughout the fight and stick to the air a lot, making the last phase brief, but very satisfying. There's not really much left for me to say about this fight. It's a straight up, no nonsense duel to the death. Save Eve and kick this monster's ass. The mutants have been stopped, the Earth has been saved, and you even rescued Eve. Congratulations, you did it. And with that, the game is won. Enjoy the ending. You've earned it. So, let's go over a few little details in that ending. The final scene is actually a reference to the original ending of Blaster Master in the NES, as well as the Japanese version on the Famicom in Metafight. See, Fred the Frog was actually just created for the American version of the game, as was the protagonist Jason Frudnick. Meanwhile, the Japanese version of the game, Metafight, had you controlling the hero Kane Gardner as the protagonist, with his reliable helper being Jennifer Cornett. Blaster Master Zero is in an interesting spot, as it's technically a remake of the original NES version of the game, but it's also a sequel to the Japanese Famicom version of the game, Metafight. And given the dialogue in that cutscene, it's easy to piece together that Kane and Jennifer got married and more or less adopted Eve as their daughter. Now, I remember there was originally a theory that Eve may have been an android in the Dragon Ball Z sense where she was actually a cyborg, but the later games proved that to not be the case, but that's a can of worms for a future video. In either way, that's gonna just about do it for this video, my friends. Blaster Master Zero is a fun time, but it's in a slightly weird spot where I think it's the weakest game in the trilogy, but also by far the easiest to just pick up and play due to its relative ease, simple story, and a short length, while the sequels are much more involved games and considerably longer. And while not all of that transfers over, I kinda have the same feelings towards it that I have towards Dark Souls 1, where I still enjoy it the least out of the trilogy, but at the same time, it's the one I can just kind of boot up and play through a little bit without having to be in a special mood for it. And with that being said, the day is saved, and our heroes lived happily ever after. What do you mean the game has two direct sequels dealing with the fallout of this game's true ending, and the original story had Jason killed mysteriously while Eve succumbed to an incurable illness?